Chapter 1 of When Woman Proposes by Anne Warner. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Jen Broda. The Woman and Her Victim. They were coming down the staircase. Natalie first, Mrs. Dupre just behind her. A very stout lady following both suddenly set her foot on the narrow train of Natalie's empire costume and caused her to cease to move. Natalie never pulled or frowned or turned her head with an awful look when people trod upon her silks or satins. She only stood still until they saw fit to move on and permit of her doing the same. Therefore, she now laid her gloved fingers lightly upon her friend's arm and said, in tones surely the sweetest ever heard from a woman who knew another woman to be aggressing on her hem, "Isn't it beautiful down there?" Mrs. Dupre put up her lorgnette and gazed over the gorgeous show beneath them. It was truly a fairy spectacle, for, unlike many princely interiors in like circumstances, the wealth that had paid for it had followed instead of leading in its design. From the large oval sweep of the marble staircase, one looked across an immense green and crystal hall, the arched ceiling of which was upborne by slender marble columns based on squares and flowering out in pure Ionic lines at the top. Long narrow windows alternated with mirrors on two sides, and arches leading into the salle de reception occupied the third. Two jeweled Moorish fountains played at either end. Great vases of flowers broke the straight lines of pillar and drapery here and there. Soft, sweet music sounded in the veiled distance, and life permeated the whole, for the scene was that of a brilliant reception given by one of the diplomatic circle. "Isn't it beautiful?" Natalie repeated. "Yes," her friend said. "It makes one wonder if anything is real except health and wealth and happiness." "I beg your pardon, madam, but may I pass?" said a voice of muffled irritation from behind. It came from the stout lady in their rear, justly irritated over anyone's blocking her way anywhere. Natalie turned and saw that her skirt was now her own again. "Oh, certainly," she said, smiling. "Do excuse me." The stout lady passed on without deigning to answer. She was evidently deeply annoyed. "Shall we not go down?" Mrs. Dupre suggested after a little. The descending crowd was surging continually by them, and the younger woman seemed totally oblivious to the fact that their immobility was causing inconvenience. She came to herself at her friend's words, however. "I had forgotten all about going down," she said. "I had forgotten everything. I was looking at that man by the pillar." Mrs. Dupre's eyes moved quickly here and there, and at once discovered the man. She was silent. "Do you see whom I mean?" asked Natalie. "The very tall man with the black mustache, is it not?" "Yes." "Certainly, I see him now." There was a brief pause, and then, "He is the best-looking man that I have ever seen in all my life," said the younger woman. Mrs. Dupre contemplated the gentleman. She was hopeless in the face of the impossibility of denial. "I haven't the slightest desire to go down to this reception," Natalie said after the passage of some few more seconds. "I am quite happy standing here and looking at that splendid man." Mrs. Dupre at once composed herself to the expectation of a long wait on the stairs. Fate creates some women to be exactly suited to the needs of some other women, and Natalie's friend had been born 10 years before Natalie herself, expressly for the purpose of understanding and chaperoning the latter's vagaries. The beneficent gods had given Mrs. Dupre just enough embonpoint to raise her above all suspicion of really being only 35 years old, and had clinched the matter by prematurely whitening her hair. It followed that Natalie, who was 25, looked 19, while Mrs. Dupre, who was 35, looked 50. In even disposition, a gentle voice and manner, a tenderly maternal sympathy, and a carriage that was so superb that it forbade any criticism as to anyone whom she honored by accompanying, completes the portrait of a lady who was generally too wise to speak when spoken to by someone who loved to speak, and rarely ever noticed the absence of response. I hope that my reader now understands both Mrs. Dupre and Mrs. Dupre's position. As to Natalie and Natalie's position, the understanding of them is not only another story, but the story itself. And all the pages to come are to be so devoted to their exposition that any information given at this juncture would be not only a foolish waste of time, but a terrific forestalling of that interest which I hope to develop more acutely with every printed period. The older lady stood still upon the staircase, her sables grouped around her shoulders and her face indicative of those high-bred, underkept emotions to which sables ever ally themselves naturally, while her companion leaned lightly against the crystal casing of the carved balustrade and continued to contemplate the man below. In her eyes glowed a kaleidoscopic succession of many sentiments, but a sort of calm speculativeness appeared to reign supreme in the end. It seems so curious to think of the kind of men that most women marry when one sees a man like that, she said after a long while. Mrs. Dupre said nothing. I should like to have married a man like him, she continued a few minutes later. Mrs. Dupre said nothing. Then Natalie suddenly ceased to lean against the balustrade, straightened up, and, as she did so, she began to unbutton the glove upon her left hand. It was a long glove of delicately hued kid, and she slipped it slowly down upon her wrist as she still kept her eyes fixed upon the tall figure by the pillar. I think that I should like to marry that man, she said, very quietly. Mrs. Dupre suppressed all evidence of surprise by catching her underlip between her fine white teeth. You have your little gold chatelaine with you, have you not, dear? Natalie was now drawing the glove from her fingertips. Yes, said Mrs. Dupre, touching a wee net of gold thread that was looped into her lorgnette's chain. Do you want it? No, said the other without moving her eyes. I don't want it, but I don't want this either. She freed her hand of the glove as she spoke and slipped off her wedding ring. Take it, Catherine, holding it out, still without turning her eyes. Drop it into your chatelaine. I don't want it any more, because I am going to marry that man down there. The conviction expressed in her words is impossible to transcribe. Mrs. Dupre, although she had considered herself equal to any new outbreak of unconventionality in speech that might be served suddenly upon her, was altogether startled out of her usual composure by these words. "My dear child," she cried in a low but urgent tone, "pray—" "I mean to marry him," Natalie declared, always looking straight at the man. "It's not the slightest use saying one word to me, Catherine. Put this ring in your chatelaine, and then, dear, please go down and ask his name. I'm going back to the dressing rooms myself. I want to get my wrap, and when you come, we will leave at once. I don't want to talk with anyone here now." She turned as she finished speaking, and mounted the stairs so swiftly as to be almost running. Mrs. Dupre stood where she was left for a minute, and her teeth sank deeply into her lip in an effort to rally her usual placidity into its usual place. Her fingers trembled somewhat, and, as she opened the little golden net to receive the ring, she felt her heart's blood throbbing in their tips. What would come next? What would result from this new phase of life, of Natalie's life? And the man below, still standing impassive by the pillar, who and what might he be? As she strove with her ebbing resolutions and her flooding sense of submersion in humanity's quicksand of the unexpected, she looked down at the man again and noted every line of his fine strength of face and figure. He stood perfectly erect, and his arms were folded on his bosom. There was something startlingly impressive in his expression and in his pose. Just then, a voice spoke at her elbow. "So glad to see you. Just come?" She turned her face to the speaker, a pretty, delicate-featured elderly lady. "No, we are just going. I stopped behind for one more souvenir of its loveliness." The other smiled and put up her glass. "Tell me," said Catherine Dupre, "do you know who that gentleman by the pillar is? He looks so very interesting." "Know him?" The elderly lady looked vaguely in the direction indicated. Oh, she saw who it was suddenly. Why, of course I know him. He's a sort of distant connection of ours. Francis Mowbray, you know. Does he live here? Mrs. Dupre asked. Dear me, no. He lives wherever they send him. He's an officer in the army, a captain in the 10th. Mrs. Dupre's eyes moved to the man's face. He's good-looking, isn't he? Said his relative. Come and take tea with me Thursday, and perhaps I can persuade him to come too. He's really interesting if you can get him to talk. He is to be here a fortnight, I believe. Cuthbert will know. Bring Mrs. Arundel with you. How is she? Dear me, I must go. His name is Francis Mowbray, I said, you know. Thursday. Don't forget. Goodbye. Mrs. Dupre went slowly back up the stairs to Natalie, whom she found standing by a window, watching the carriages come and go, with eyes that saw nothing for the moment. The eyes saw the friend readily enough, however, and brightened perceptibly. Oh, Catherine, you found out his name. I see it in your face. Yes, What is it? Francis Mowbray. Does he live here? No, Where does he live? What is he? An officer in what, Catherine? Do speak quicker. In the 10th. What's his rank? He's a captain. A captain? Is that a very high position? I think so. A captain in the 10th. Then I must learn all about the 10th and all about the army. Her tone became meditative. I never thought anything about marrying an officer. I never thought much about marrying anybody again. But of course now I must learn all that there is to learn. She drew a deep breath. A maid approached with a velvet coat over her arm. Whom did you ask about him? Was the next question while the coat was being put on. Mrs. Galbraith. She came down the stairs as I was closing my chatelaine. It seems that he is a distant relative of hers. Did she speak of Cuthbert? She only mentioned him. Natalie reflected a minute while the coat was being properly hooked, and then with an air that was half pitying and half joyful relief. I never would have married Cuthbert Galbraith anyhow, you know. Mrs. Galbraith asked us to come there to tea on Thursday, and possibly Captain Mowbray would come too. I don't want to meet him that way the first time. Mrs. Dupre was surveying herself in the mirror, and now took up her muff. If I had wanted to meet him in that kind of way the first time, I should have gone on down and met him today. Mrs. Dupre stood waiting. I do not believe that you have realized what has happened, said the younger woman very gravely. I mean every word that I have been saying, and I shall mean it more every hour from now till I die. It's a tremendous thing for a woman to see a man she wants to marry, and then decide to marry him, and then go on and do it. It means ever so much, and ever so much work, too. He may have different ideas from me, and then I shall have to make myself all over to suit him. Or he may live in some queer place, and in that case, I shall have to learn to be quite content in a queer place, just because he lives there. A sudden cold, steel chill fled through Mrs. Dupre. She recollected that she had not asked whether the captain was married or single. Her throat choked. Natalie, she asked, if he has a wife? Natalie turned and looked at her. Oh, Catherine, she said almost impatiently. How hard you do try to find something to bother about. Of course he has no wife. How could I marry him if he had a wife? You must be reasonable about things. Come now, we'll go to the carriage and take a nice long drive before dinner. I want to be out in the fresh air. All this has sent the blood to my head so that it almost aches. They went down to the carriage in silence, and during the hour's drive that followed, neither spoke. Mrs. Dupre tried to restore order to the new and unexpected chaos into which she had just been initiated, and Natalie leaned comfortably back and contemplated with pleasure the prospect of marrying a man whose voice she had never heard and about whom she knew positively nothing except his name and rank. Oh, yes, and she knew what he looked like. With many women, that stands for a great deal, and with Natalie, it stood just now for almost everything, as the reader knows. However, there are some few happy individuals in this world who may be judged at a glance just because their minds and bodies have developed in perfect unison and along lines equally sound and straight. Let us hope that we are to find such a one in Francis Mowbray, Captain in the 10th. End of Chapter 1.